Margaret Henderson is 73 years old. 3 weeks ago, she opened her mailbox and found a letter from the Social Security Administration. She gets mail from Social Security every year. The usual notices about cost of living adjustments, Medicare premium changes, nothing unusual. This letter was different. The letter said her monthly Social Security benefit was being reduced from $1,872 to $1,431, $441 per month, gone. Effective immediately, no warning, no phone call, no opportunity to prepare. Just a letter in the mail telling her that nearly a quarter of her income was disappearing. Margaret read the letter 3 times. She didn't understand. She'd been collecting Social Security for 8 years. Same amount every month, $1,272 direct deposit on the 3rd Wednesday of every month for 8 years. She could set her calendar by it. It was the most reliable thing in her life. And now suddenly it was $441 less. The letter said her benefit was being recalculated due to a correction in her earnings record. It said she'd been overpaid for the past 8 years. It said Social Security was now reducing her monthly benefit to recover the overpayment, $400 less every month for the rest of her life. Not temporarily, not for a few months until things got sorted out. Forever. Margaret called the Social Security Administration. She dialed the number on the letter. She waited on hold for 2 hours and 17 minutes. She knows the exact time because she started a timer on her phone at 9:13 a.m., and an agent finally answered at 11:30 a.m. When an agent finally answered, Margaret said, "I received a letter saying my benefit is being reduced by $441 a month. I don't understand what happened. Can you please explain this to me?" The agent said, "Ma'am, according to our records, your benefit was calculated incorrectly when you first applied in 2017. You reported earnings from a part-time job you worked while collecting benefits, but the earnings were reported to us late by your employer. So, when we initially calculated your benefit, we didn't reduce it for those earnings. Now, we've corrected the record and adjusted your benefit to what it should have been all along." Margaret said, "But that was 8 years ago. I reported that job when I applied. I told the person who helped me with my application that I was working part-time. They asked me how much I was making. I told them. They said it was under the limit and it wouldn't affect my benefits. You said it was fine. How can you change it now, 8 years later?" The agent said, "Yes, ma'am, but your employer didn't submit your earnings to us until 2024. So we're now applying the earnings test retroactively. Your benefit is being reduced going forward, and we're also calculating the overpayment amount for the past 8 years. Margaret said, "Overpayment? What do you mean, overpayment? How much are you saying I owe?" The agent said, "According to our calculation, you were overpaid by approximately $38,000 over the past 8 years. We'll be sending you a separate notice about repayment options within the next few weeks." Margaret started crying. $38,000. She repeated it out loud to make sure she heard correctly. $38,000. She didn't have $38,000. She didn't have $3,800. She didn't have $380 in savings. She spent every dollar of her Social Security check every month. Rent, utilities, food, medications. There was nothing left over. She had $427 in her savings account. That was her emergency fund. That was supposed to cover unexpected expenses, like if her car broke down or if she needed to go to the dentist. And they were telling her she owed $38,000. The agent said, "Ma'am, you can appeal the decision or request a payment plan for the overpayment. The notice will explain your options. There are forms you can fill out." Margaret hung up. She didn't know what else to say. She sat at her kitchen table and looked at her bills. The bills she'd just paid last week, the bills she pays every month like clockwork. Rent, $950, utilities, $180, Medicare Part B premium, $174, supplemental insurance, $212, medications, $290, food, $300, total $1,206 per month. Margaret's old Social Security benefit, $1,872. She was already running a deficit of $234 every month. She made up the difference by eating cheaper food, turning off her heat, skipping medications when she could stretch them, doing little things here and there to save money. Margaret's new Social Security benefit, $1,231. She was now $675 short every month, and Social Security wanted $38,000 back. Margaret is not a hypothetical example. She's not a made-up case study I created to make a point. She's a real person who contacted me 4 weeks ago after watching one of my videos about Social Security earnings limits. She sent me an email with her story. She included copies of the letters she received from Social Security. She asked me what she should do, and I had to tell her something that made her cry even harder. I said, "Margaret, you should have contacted me 8 years ago because what happened to you could have been prevented if you'd understood the Social Security earnings test when you first started collecting. If you'd known what to look for, if you'd known what to verify, if you'd known what to report and how to report it, none of this would have happened." I'm Dr. Ed Graham. I spent 3 years working inside the Social Security Administration as a claims processing supervisor. I reviewed thousands of benefit calculations. I trained new employees on how to process claims. I dealt with overpayment cases. I saw this exact situation happen to hundreds of people. People who worked part-time while collecting Social Security benefits. People who reported their earnings honestly. People who thought everything was fine. They did what they were told. They reported their jobs. They answered questions truthfully. And then years later, they got letters just like Margaret's. Benefit reductions, overpayment notices, financial destruction, and every single time it was preventable because the Social Security earnings test isn't secret. It's not hidden in some classified document that only government officials can access. It's published right on the Social Security Administration website. You can read it right now if you go to SSA.gov, but nobody reads it. Nobody understands it. And the Social Security Administration doesn't explain it clearly when you apply for benefits. They ask you if you're working, you say yes. They ask you how much you make, you tell them, they say okay, and you assume that means everything's been handled correctly. So let me tell you what happened to Margaret and why it's about to happen to thousands more people in 2026. And then I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do right now today to make sure it doesn't happen to you. But first, let me finish Margaret's story because you need to understand just how bad this can get. You need to see the full picture of what happens when Social Security decides you've been overpaid and starts clawing back years of benefits. After Margaret got the letter and called Social Security, she tried to figure out how to survive on $1,231 per month. She sat down with a calculator and her bills and tried to make the numbers work. They didn't work. No matter how she rearranged things, she was hundreds of dollars short every month. She called her landlord and explained the situation. She's been renting the same apartment for 12 years. Same landlord, always paid on time, never missed a payment, never caused problems. She thought maybe he'd understand. She asked if she could pay less rent. Just temporarily, she said, just until she figured things out. The landlord said no. He wasn't mean about it. He just said he couldn't do it. The lease was $950 per month. That was the rent. If she couldn't pay, she'd have to move. He told her he was sorry about her situation, but he had his own bills to pay. The mortgage on the building, property taxes, maintenance costs. He couldn't just reduce her rent because she couldn't afford it anymore. Margaret started looking for cheaper apartments. She spent days searching online, calling numbers, visiting properties. Everything she found was either the same price or in neighborhoods she was afraid to live in. She's 73 years old. She walks with a cane. She can't move to a dangerous area where she'd be worried about getting mugged. Every time she went to the grocery store, she needs to feel safe. Margaret called her daughter in Ohio. Her daughter is 48 years old, married with 2 teenage kids, 16 and 14. Margaret asked if she could move in with them temporarily until she figured things out. Maybe just for a few months, she said, just until she could get her Social Security situation resolved or find a cheaper place to live or figure out some way to make ends meet. Her daughter said, "Mom, we don't have room. We're in a 3-bedroom house. My husband and I have 1 bedroom. The kids each have a bedroom. There's no extra space. The kids are sharing bedrooms already would be one thing, but they each have their own room, and we can't kick them out. I'm sorry. I wish I could help." Margaret called her son in Arizona. He's 45, divorced, living in a 2-bedroom apartment with his 12-year-old daughter, who stays with him half the time. Same answer, no room. "Mom, I'd love to help, but I barely have space for me and Emma. I'm really sorry." Margaret went to her bank and asked about a personal loan. She explained her situation. She needed money to cover the gap in her rent until she could figure things out. The bank looked at her finances. 427 in savings, no assets, no car, no property, nothing valuable she could use as collateral. Fixed income that just got cut by $440 per month. The bank said no. She didn't qualify. Her income was too low and getting lower. Her debt-to-income ratio was too high. She was a credit risk. They couldn't approve a loan. Margaret applied for food stamps. She'd never applied for government assistance before. She'd always been independent, always paid her own way, always taken care of herself. But she didn't have a choice anymore. She went to the local social services office, filled out the paperwork, provided documentation of her income and expenses, and waited. She qualified for $112 per month in SNAP benefits. That helped a little, but she was still $563 short every month. That $112 meant she could buy some groceries without dipping into money she needed for rent, but it wasn't nearly enough to solve her problem. Margaret looked at her medications. She was taking 2 different blood pressure medications, a cholesterol medication, a medication for arthritis, and a medication for anxiety. Total cost, $290 per month, even with Medicare Part D coverage. She couldn't afford that anymore. She stopped taking one of her blood pressure medications to save money. She was taking 2 different blood pressure pills. She kept the cheaper one, the one that cost $45 a month. She stopped the expensive one that cost $87 a month. Her doctor had prescribed both because her blood pressure wasn't controlled on one medication alone. But she couldn't afford both anymore. Saved $87 per month. Margaret started eating 1 meal a day instead of 2. She'd been eating breakfast and dinner every day. She cut out dinner. Just breakfast now. Coffee and toast in the morning. Nothing else until the next morning. Saved about $150 per month on food, even with the SNAP benefits. Margaret turned off her heat in winter. This was January, cold outside. She lives in Pennsylvania. Temperatures in the 20s and 30s most days. She turned off her heat and wore layers of clothing inside her apartment. 2 sweaters, a coat, gloves sometimes. She slept under 3 blankets, saved about $40 per month on utilities. Margaret was still $286 short every month after all of these cuts. She started pulling money out of her $427 savings account to cover the gap. By month 2, her savings account was empty. $0. Her emergency fund was gone. By month 3, Margaret was 30 days late on rent. Her landlord sent her an eviction notice, 3-day notice to pay or quit. If she didn't pay the full amount she owed, plus late fees within 3 days, he would file for eviction and she'd have to leave. Margaret went to a legal aid office. She waited in line for 3 hours. When she finally met with an attorney, they told her she might qualify for emergency rental assistance. There were programs that could help with past due rent. She needed to apply. They helped her fill out the application. She was put on a waiting list. Estimated wait time, 4 to 6 months. Margaret is currently living in her apartment under an eviction notice, waiting to see if emergency assistance comes through before the sheriff shows up to remove her belongings. She doesn't know what she'll do if the eviction goes through. She doesn't have anywhere to go. Her kids can't take her in. She doesn't have money for a new apartment. She'd need first month, last month, security deposit, moving costs. She doesn't have any of that, and the $38,000 overpayment, Social Security sent her a letter offering a repayment plan, $50 per month for the rest of her life. At $50 per month, it would take her 760 months to pay it back. That's 63 years. She's 73 years old. She'll be 136 when she finishes paying it back. Margaret's benefit is now effectively $1,181 per month after the $441 reduction and the $50 repayment deduction. Margaret worked for 41 years. She started working at age 18 as a secretary. She worked her way up to office manager. She retired at age 59. She paid into Social Security her entire career. Every paycheck, she saw the deduction for Social Security taxes. She paid in for 41 years. She did everything right. She reported her part-time earnings when she worked while collecting benefits. She was honest. She answered every question truthfully. She followed the rules. And Social Security destroyed her financially because her employer filed her earnings paperwork late. This is what happens when you don't understand the Social Security earnings test. This is what happens when you assume Social Security will warn you about problems. This is what happens when you trust the system to take care of you. Now, let me tell you exactly what the earnings test is and why Margaret's situation is happening to thousands of people right now. Because if you don't understand this, if you think this could never happen to you, you're wrong. It can happen to anyone who's collecting Social Security before their full retirement age and working or earning any income. The Social Security earnings test applies to people who are collecting Social Security retirement benefits before their full retirement age and who are still working or earning income. If you're under your full retirement age, which is 67 for most people retiring now, 66 in some months for people born between 1943 and 1954, and you earn more than a certain amount from working, Social Security will reduce your benefit. In 2026, the earnings limit is $23,400. If you earn more than $23,400 from working while you're collecting Social Security before full retirement age, Social Security reduces your benefit by $1 for every $2 you earn over the limit. This isn't a tax. This is a reduction in your Social Security benefit. They're withholding part of your benefit. Here's an example to make this clear. Let's say you're 64 years old. You're collecting Social Security retirement benefits of $2,000 per month. That's $24,000 per year. And you work part-time, making $30,000 per year. You're earning $6,600 over the $23,400 limit. $30,000 minus $23,400 equals $6,600 over. Social Security will reduce your benefit by half of that amount. Half of $6,600 is $300 per year. That's $275 per month. So your $2,000 monthly benefit becomes $1,725 per month while you're working and earning over the limit. That's how it's supposed to work when everything goes smoothly. You report your earnings when you apply for benefits or when you start working. Social Security adjusts your benefit based on your earnings. You know exactly what you're getting. No surprises. You can plan your budget. You know what to expect. But here's what happened to Margaret. And here's what's happening to thousands of people right now because of how the system actually works versus how it's supposed to work. Margaret applied for Social Security benefits in 2017 at age 65. She was 3 years into collecting when I met her. But let me take you back to the beginning. She filed her application online in October 2017. Her full retirement age was 66 and 6 months, which meant she wouldn't reach full retirement age until April 2019. But she was eligible to start collecting reduced benefits at 65. When she filled out the application, there was a question. Are you currently working, or do you expect to work after your benefits start? Margaret answered yes. Another question. What are your estimated earnings for this year? Margaret entered $14,000. She was working part-time at a grocery store, making $12 an hour, about 20 hours a week. Social Security calculated her benefit at $1,172 per month. They did not reduce her benefit because her earnings of $14,000 were well under the earnings limit, which was $16,220 that year in 2017. Everything was correct at that point. Her application was approved. Benefits started in December 2017. First payment hit her bank account in January 2018, $1,172. Perfect. But then, in May 2018, 6 months after she started collecting, Margaret's hours at the grocery store increased. The store lost 2 employees who quit without notice. The manager asked Margaret if she could work more hours to help cover shifts until they hired replacements. Margaret said yes. She went from working 20 hours a week to 30 hours a week. Her annual earnings increased from $14,000 to approximately $24,000 over the limit. Margaret knew she was supposed to report this. She remembered the application had asked about earnings. She called the Social Security Administration in June 2018. She waited on hold for 47 minutes. When an agent answered, Margaret said, "I started collecting Social Security in January. When I applied, I told you I was earning about $14,000 a year from a part-time job. My hours recently increased, and I'm now earning about $24,000 a year. I wanted to report that so you can adjust my benefit if needed." The agent said, "Okay, ma'am, let me make a note in your file. Margaret heard typing. The agent said, "I've noted that your earnings have increased to $24,000. We'll adjust your benefit accordingly. Thank you for letting us know." Margaret said, "When will the adjustment happen? Will I get a letter?" The agent said, "It may take a few months to process, but yes, you should receive a notice if your benefit amount changes." Margaret hung up, feeling relieved. She'd done the right thing. She reported her increased earnings. Social Security said they'd adjust her benefit. She waited for the notice. Months passed. No notice, no letter, no change to her benefit. She kept receiving $1,272 every month. Margaret assumed everything was fine. She'd reported her earnings. The agent said they'd adjust her benefit. They hadn't adjusted it, so maybe her earnings still weren't high enough to trigger a reduction. Maybe she'd miscalculated. Maybe $24,000 wasn't actually over the limit. She didn't understand all the rules. She just trusted that Social Security knew what they were doing. Margaret continued working at the grocery store through 2018, 2019, and 2020. Her hours varied. Some weeks 25 hours, some weeks 35 hours. Her annual earnings were roughly $22,000 to $26,000 each year, hovering right around the earnings limit. She didn't call Social Security again because she'd already reported her increased earnings back in 2018, and they said they'd noted it. In March 2020, the pandemic hit. The grocery store reduced hours. Margaret's earnings dropped back down to about $18,000 for 2020. In 2021, she stopped working entirely. She was 69 years old, past her full retirement age, and she decided it was time to fully retire. From 2021 through 2024, Margaret lived on her Social Security benefit of $1,172 per month. No issues, same amount every month. She built her life around that income. She knew exactly what was coming in every month, and she budgeted accordingly. Then, in December 2024, 7 years after she first started collecting, Margaret received the letter that changed everything. Here's what happened behind the scenes, the part Margaret didn't know about and couldn't have known about because Social Security never told her. When Margaret called Social Security in June 2018 to report her increased earnings, the agent made a note in her file. That note said, "Beneficiary reports earnings increased to $24,000 for 2018. Adjust benefit per earnings test." But Social Security doesn't adjust your benefit based on what you tell them over the phone. They adjust your benefit based on earnings data they receive from your employer through the IRS. Your employer files your W-2 form with the IRS every year showing how much you earned. The IRS shares that data with Social Security. Social Security compares the earnings data to your reported benefit claim and makes adjustments if necessary. That's how it's supposed to work. But Margaret's employer, a small family-owned grocery store with 8 employees, didn't file Margaret's W-2 earnings data with the IRS on time. Small businesses sometimes fall behind on paperwork, especially if they don't have a dedicated payroll department or HR person. Margaret's employer was using a basic accounting software and handling payroll themselves. They filed Margaret's W-2 for 2017 on time, but they didn't file her W-2s for 2018, 2019, or 2020 until 2024, 6 years late for 2018. 5 years late for 2019, 4 years late for 2020, when Social Security finally received Margaret's earnings data in mid-2024. Their computer system flagged her account. The system saw that she'd been collecting benefits since 2017, that she'd had earnings over the limit for 2018, 2019, and 2020, and that her benefit had never been reduced for those earnings. The system calculated that Margaret's benefit should have been reduced by approximately $312 per month for 2018, 2019, and 2020. She'd received $1,872 per month when she should have received $1,560 per month for those 3 years. That's an overpayment of $11,232. But wait, there's more. Margaret continued working part of 2021 before she stopped entirely. Her employer didn't file that W-2 on time either. More overpayments, total accumulated overpayment, according to Social Security's calculation, $38,127. In November 2024, Social Security sent Margaret the letter that showed up in her mailbox 3 weeks ago, the letter that destroyed her life. The letter said, "Your benefit was calculated incorrectly. You were overpaid $38,127. Your current benefit is being reduced to $1,231 per month going forward. We'll send you a separate notice about repayment options. And here's the worst part, the part that makes this so infuriating, the part that keeps me up at night thinking about all the people this is happening to right now. Margaret did nothing wrong. She reported her earnings. She called Social Security in 2018 and told them her income had increased. She was honest. She was trying to do the right thing. But because her employer filed the paperwork late, Social Security is treating it as if Margaret never reported anything and is now clawing back years of overpayments. The agent she spoke to in 2018 made a note in her file. That note is still there. I've seen Margaret's file. The note is there. Beneficiary reports earnings increased to $24,000 for 2018. But that note doesn't matter. Social Security's position is that notes from phone calls aren't official reports. Official reports are written forms submitted with documentation. Phone calls are just notes. They don't trigger benefit adjustments. Only employer-reported earnings data triggers adjustments. So Margaret's phone call in 2018, the call where she honestly reported her increased earnings, didn't actually accomplish anything. It created a note in her file showing that she tried to report, but it didn't protect her from the overpayment because it wasn't an official written report with documentation. This exact scenario is happening to thousands of people right now. I'm going to tell you about David Chen in a minute, whose situation is even worse than Margaret's. But first, I need you to understand the three types of people who are at highest risk for these overpayment disasters. Now, let me tell you about David Chen, because David's situation shows you just how catastrophic the new 2026 overpayment policy can be. David is 68 years old. He retired at age 62 in 2020 and started collecting Social Security. His benefit was $2,100 per month. He collected that amount from 2020 to 2024 with absolutely no issues. Every month, like clockwork, $2,100 direct deposit. He built his retirement around that income. In December 2024, David received a letter from Social Security. It said that in 2019, the year before he retired, he had earned $78,000 from his job. But Social Security's records showed he'd already started collecting retirement benefits in November 2019 at age 61. David was confused. He didn't start collecting Social Security until 2020 when he turned 62. He retired in January 2020. He started collecting in February 2020. The letter was wrong. David called Social Security immediately. He explained the error. He said, "Your letter says I was collecting benefits in 2019, but I didn't start collecting until 2020. I was still working in 2019. I didn't retire until 2020. The agent pulled up his file. She said, "Sir, our records show you filed for benefits in November 2019 with a start date of December 2019. You received your first payment in January 2020. David said, "Yes, that's correct. I filed in November 2019. My benefits were supposed to start in December 2019, which they did. I received my first payment in January 2020 because there's always a 1-month delay. But I was 62 when I applied. I had already retired by then. I wasn't working anymore when I applied." The agent said, "Sir, our records show you were born in October 1958. That means you turned 62 in October 2020, not 2019. If you applied for benefits in November 2019, you were only 61. And if you were 61 and still working, earning $78,000, you weren't eligible for retirement benefits yet. You applied a year too early." David was stunned. He said, "But you approved my application. You've been paying me for 5 years. How can you just now be telling me I applied too early? Why didn't someone catch this when I applied?" The agent said, "Sir, it appears there was an error in processing your application. Your birth date was entered incorrectly in our system. It showed you were born in October 1957 instead of October 1958. So the system approved your application thinking you were 62 when you applied. We've now corrected your birth date in our system, and the system flagged that you shouldn't have been receiving benefits for the first year." David felt sick. He said, "So what does that mean for me?" The agent said, "It means you were overpaid for all of 2020 because you weren't eligible to receive benefits yet. 12 months at $2,100 per month, that's $25,200 in overpayments. We'll be withholding your benefits to recover the overpayment. David said, withholding? What does that mean? For how long? The agent said, your January 2025 benefit has already been withheld. We'll continue withholding your monthly benefits until the full overpayment amount is recovered. David didn't receive his Social Security payment in January 2025. Nothing. $0. His bank account showed no deposit. February, nothing. March, nothing. April, nothing. 4 months of no Social Security payments. 4 months of zero income. David had no other income. His wife is 64, not collecting Social Security yet. They have no pension. They have some savings, but not much. They were living entirely on David's $2,100 monthly Social Security benefit. That was their only source of regular monthly income. With no income for 4 months, David couldn't pay his mortgage. He couldn't pay utilities. He couldn't buy food. He had to borrow $8,000 from his son just to survive. He maxed out 2 credit cards. He fell behind on his property taxes. He fell behind on his homeowner's insurance. In April 2025, David received a letter from Social Security. It said the overpayment had been fully recovered. They'd withheld his benefits for 4 months, totaling $8,400 in withheld benefits to recover the $2,200 overpayment. Wait, that math doesn't work, does it? 4 months at $2,100 is $8,400, but the overpayment was $25,200. Here's what happened. Social Security withheld his entire benefit for 4 months, $8,400. Then they adjusted how they calculated the rest. They determined he'd been overpaid $25,200, but they could only withhold 100% of his benefit for a limited time under the new policy before they had to switch to a payment plan for the remaining balance. The remaining $16,800 would be deducted at $100 per month for the next 168 months. David's benefits resumed in May 2025, but at a reduced amount because his birth date was now corrected in the system. His benefit calculation was different. His benefit went from $2,100 per month to $1,210 per month. And with the $100 monthly deduction for the overpayment repayment plan, his actual monthly benefit is now $1,810. David went from $2,100 per month to zero for 4 months to $1,210 per month going forward. He lost $290 per month permanently, and he spent 4 months with no income, borrowing money, maxing out credit cards, falling behind on bills, all because Social Security entered his birth date wrong when they processed his application 5 years earlier. David did nothing wrong. Social Security made the error. They entered his birth date incorrectly. They approved his application when they shouldn't have, based on the wrong birth date. They paid him for 5 years, and then they punished him by withholding 4 months of benefits and reducing his ongoing benefits permanently. This is the new Social Security overpayment policy in action. This is what's happening right now in 2026, and it's going to happen to more and more people as Social Security continues auditing old claims and discovering errors. Now, let me tell you about the 3 biggest mistakes people are making right now that are triggering these overpayment disasters. If you're making any of these mistakes, stop immediately. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who said, I told Social Security I was working when I applied for benefits. I answered all their questions. They asked if I had a job. I said yes. They asked how much I make. I told them, so they must have adjusted my benefit correctly. No, Social Security adjusts your benefit based on earnings data from the IRS, not based on what you tell them verbally when you apply. If your employer doesn't file your W-2 on time, if your employer goes out of business and never files it, if you're self-employed and file your tax return late, Social Security won't know about your earnings until years later. And when they finally get the data, they'll reduce your benefit retroactively and demand repayment of everything they overpaid you for all those years. Don't assume they know. Report your earnings in writing every single year. Create your own paper trail. Protect yourself. Most people apply for Social Security, start receiving benefits, and never look at their My Social Security account again. They assume everything is fine. The checks keep coming every month. Same amount. Must be correct. Then 5 years later, 7 years later, 10 years later, they get a letter saying there was an error in their earnings record going back years. and they've been overpaid for all that time, and now they owe tens of thousands of dollars. Check your earnings record at least once a year. Log in. Look at it. Make sure your current earnings are showing up. Make sure past earnings are correct. Make sure your birth date is correct. Make sure everything looks right. Catch errors early before they turn into overpayment nightmares. Margaret didn't check her earnings record for 8 years. If she'd checked in 2019 or 2020 and seen that her 2018 and 2019 earnings weren't showing up yet, she could have contacted Social Security and said, "Hey, I reported earnings of $24,000 for 2018, but it's not showing up in your system. Can you check on this?" She could have caught the problem before it accumulated into $38,000 in overpayments. A lot of people receive notices from Social Security and throw them away without reading them carefully because they assume it's just informational. Just a notice about the annual cost of living adjustment, just a notice about Medicare premiums, nothing important. Every notice from Social Security is important. If you receive a notice about a benefit change, an overpayment, an earnings discrepancy, a recalculation, anything that says your benefit is changing or you owe money or there's an issue with your account, read it immediately. If you don't understand it, contact Social Security. Call them. Visit an office. Consult with someone who specializes in Social Security issues. Figure out what the notice means and what you need to do. And if the notice says you have the right to appeal and you disagree with what the notice says, appeal within 60 days. Once that 60-day window closes, you lose your rights. The decision becomes final. You can't fight it anymore. Now, let me tell you about the one mistake that's worse than all of those combined. The mistake that cost Margaret her housing. The mistake that cost David 4 months of income. The mistake that destroys lives. The mistake is trusting that Social Security will protect you. Social Security is not your friend. Social Security is not your advocate. Social Security is a bureaucracy. It's a massive government agency processing millions of claims every year with outdated computer systems from the 1980s and offices that are chronically understaffed. Errors happen constantly. Birth dates entered wrong, earnings data misapplied, benefits calculated incorrectly, computer systems that flag accounts based on incomplete information. And when errors happen, you're the one who suffers. Margaret trusted that when she reported her earnings over the phone in 2018, Social Security would handle it. The agent said they'd noted it in her file. The agent said they'd adjust her benefit. Margaret trusted that would happen. It didn't. David trusted that when Social Security approved his application and paid him for 5 years, that meant everything was correct. They wouldn't have approved it if there was an error, right? They wouldn't have paid him for 5 years if he wasn't eligible, right? Wrong. They made an error. They entered his birth date wrong. They approved him when they shouldn't have. And 5 years later, they clawed it all back. Both of them assumed Social Security would warn them if there was a problem. Social Security would call them. Social Security would send a letter asking them to verify something. Social Security would give them a chance to fix things before it became a disaster. Social Security didn't warn them. They just sent letters years later demanding tens of thousands of dollars back and reducing benefits immediately with no warning, no opportunity to prepare, no chance to contest it before the damage was done. You cannot trust Social Security to protect you. You have to protect yourself. That means checking your records every year. That means reporting your earnings in writing with proof of delivery. That means verifying everything. That means appealing errors immediately. That means requesting waivers when you're overpaid through no fault of your own. Social Security is not on your side. Social Security is a system, and systems don't care about individual people. Systems care about following rules and processing claims and hitting metrics. If the system makes an error that destroys your life, that's unfortunate, but the system doesn't care. The system moves on to the next case. Now, let me tell you what happened to Margaret after she contacted me, because I want you to see that there is a path forward. Even if you're in this situation, even though it's difficult and painful and unfair, I told Margaret she needed to file an appeal immediately and request a waiver of the overpayment. I walked her through how to fill out Form SSA 632. I helped her gather financial documents showing her monthly income and expenses. I helped her write a statement explaining that she'd reported her earnings by phone in 2018, that her employer had filed the W-2s late and that she couldn't afford to repay $38,000. Margaret filed her appeal and waiver request in early January 2026. She sent everything certified mail. She got proof of delivery. As of today, 3 weeks later, she hasn't received a decision yet. Appeals take months, sometimes over a year. The Social Security Administration is backed up. They're understaffed. They're processing thousands of appeals. But here's what happened when Margaret filed the waiver request. Social Security stopped withholding the $50 monthly repayment from her benefit. The law requires them to stop withholding while a waiver request is pending. So her benefit went back up from $1,280 to $1,231. That helped, but she's still short $675 per month compared to her expenses. She still can't pay her full rent. The eviction notice is still active. Margaret applied for emergency rental assistance through the county. She's been placed on a waiting list. The estimated wait time is 4 to 6 months. She might get assistance, she might not. There's no guarantee. Margaret's daughter in Ohio reconsidered and offered to let Margaret move in temporarily. It wasn't easy. They don't have extra space. But the daughter talked to her husband, and they decided they couldn't let her mother become homeless. Margaret is planning to move to Ohio next month. She'll sleep on a pull-out couch in the living room. She'll lose her independence. She'll lose her privacy. She'll be far from the friends and community she's had for 40 years in Pennsylvania. But she won't be homeless. That's something. Margaret worked for 41 years. She paid into Social Security her entire career. She did everything right. She was honest. She reported her earnings. She followed the rules as she understood them. And at age 73, she's moving into her daughter's living room because Social Security overpaid her due to an employer's late paperwork and then demanded it all back. This is what can happen when you don't understand how Social Security actually works. This is what can happen when you trust the system to take care of you. And this is why I'm making this video, because thousands of people are in Margaret's situation right now. Thousands more will be in this situation in the next few months as Social Security continues processing late earnings data from employers and discovering overpayments that accumulated years ago. You need to protect yourself. You need to check your records. You need to report your earnings in writing. You need to verify your birth date. You need to appeal errors within 60 days. You need to request waivers when appropriate. And you need to understand that Social Security is not your friend. It's a bureaucracy. And bureaucracies make errors. And when they make errors, you're the one who suffers unless you catch them first. If this video helped you, if this information opened your eyes to risks you didn't know existed, share it with everyone you know who's collecting Social Security or planning to collect soon, your parents, your siblings, your friends, your co-workers, because most people have no idea this is happening. Most people think Social Security will warn them before there's a problem. Most people trust the system. And by the time they find out that trust was misplaced, it's too late. They're already facing eviction like Margaret. They're already 4 months behind on their mortgage like David. They're already in a financial disaster that could have been prevented if they'd known what to look for. Share this video. It could save someone's financial life. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, subscribe now, because I make videos like this every week. Videos about Social Security, Medicare, retirement planning, taxes, disability benefits, information the government should be giving you but isn't. I left my job at the Social Security Administration because I was tired of watching people get destroyed by a system that's supposed to protect them. I'm going to keep making these videos as long as people need this information. Subscribe, share, and protect yourself, because Social Security won't.